There are a lot of weird terms in the Pokemon fandom, like Pikachu clones, or pseudo-legendaries, or Dexit. Even though we all generally agree on what those mean, we still love to argue about the details, like what are the exact requirements for a Pokemon to be considered pseudo-legendary? Or whether Pichu or Mimikyu should be grouped with the Pikachu clones. Those are all fan-made terms. We as a community invented and defined, and in some ways continue to define what those terms mean. But the Pokemon canon has terms like that too. Terms that are not fully defined, or whether the definition changed over time. Terms that are maybe just a bit confusing or even flat out wrong. After I made my video talking about the term main series and how it's pretty much impossible to define it because it just means whatever the Pokemon company wants it to mean, I wanted to explore some of the in-game terms that also have similar problems. I asked you in a community post what kinds of terms you were interested in learning about, and compiled a list that had a wide range from fairly simple gameplay terms like the names of types to much bigger concepts of the world building. And then I sent this list to the source, or as close to the source as I could get. I contacted Nob Ogasawara, who translated almost all of the Pokemon games through Generation 4. Great guy, very friendly. I'll put a link to his Twitter in the description. You should go follow him on there. I hoped that Nob would be able to give me some context for those terms, some of the rationale behind why they were chosen, either in the translation or maybe even in the original. But it turns out that Nob was not responsible for most of the terms that in the first few games would have been rendered in all caps. Things like Pokemon names or move names and other key terms. Those were done by someone else within Nintendo of America and just passed along to him. He never got much input into that stuff until around Generation 4, although he would occasionally have his say if NOA were stuck with something, particularly from Gen 2 onward. So Nob was really not involved in most of these decisions. And on top of that, almost all of the terms that I asked him about, he confirmed that the translations were accurate to what the Japanese term was. Nob was still able to offer some very helpful insight on some of the terms, but ultimately I was left to speculate. Thankfully though, I didn't have to speculate alone.
I'm Kara. I have a PhD in linguistics. I like to think about constructed languages and the use of language in fiction.
Kara knows Japanese as well, which is very fortuitous for this discussion. Before we go into specific terms, I wanted to hear from Kara about how words really work and the importance of making sure that you actually get the meaning of what I'm trying to say.
Well, so one of the things about language, right, is that it's sort of, in some ways, it's like a living organism, right? It's always changing. It's always developing new vocabularies and new changes. And there are always people who are learning the language. There are children. Every day, someone is learning more and more of the language. And so, like, a language itself is very complicated, and the way we learn words has to do with context in use. So there's really actually no way to make sure anyone is on the same page. And in fact, language itself, you are never on the same page. In America or North America, we have robins that are, a particular type of bird, a little red breast, and they're kind of largish, and they are always around in the spring, and they eat the worms. And in England, they have a different type of bird that is also called a robin. And so you can have a totally seemingly sensical conversation with someone from the UK being like, "Oh, I saw a robin outside my window. It was really cute. Spring has come," and he'll be like, "That's great. I've also seen a robin just recently," and you guys can have completely different pictures of this bird, and yet still and not know that you're not understanding things in the same way, and still have a functional conversation. So it really isn't that important. Words are inherently arbitrary. And so, the fact that we have the word dog to mean dog is like an entire accident. There's nothing doggish about the word dog. And in fact, we don't know where the word came from. It's not, the rest of the languages don't use anything related to dog. Someone just started calling them a dog one day, and now English is like, we have the word dog. We're going to go with this. It's a good word.
We even have words that can be used with completely different meanings just depending on context. The word cult, for example. If you're talking about a cult leader, that's a negative thing. But if you're talking about a cult classic, that's positive. And it's the same word in both cases. It's not a homonym like Wales and Wales, or even a homograph like ash and ash. The word cult is the same word in both uses. It just has a different meaning based on context.
You learn things in context and you apply them in context. So particularly considering we're talking about like games and things like that, games are in some sense world building, right? They're building a world. And so the words they choose are really important for the world they're building. And they shape your perception of that world. They don't necessarily have any real implication on like how you would use the word outside the game context. But the way those words relate to each other can give you an impression of the world of the game that is very specific.
And that's what will be important in this conversation. The effect of word choice on how we interpret the Pokemon world, and the ways that that does or doesn't actually serve the game.
It's fun to think about world building with language because you can do so much of it, especially if you sort of think about the way language is so flexible and people learn it so quickly. You're never trapped by it.
This video is just an introduction. In each of the next 4 videos, which will be coming out over the next 2 weeks, we will look at 4 different topics through the lens of linguistics. First, we'll look at some terms that operate more on the game level in the sense that they're more directly related to how the player interacts with the game. Second, we'll be analyzing some very specific word choices to see what we can learn about the geopolitics of the Pokemon world. Third, we'll dissect 2 terms that play into the scientific aspect of the Pokemon world. And fourth, we will finally break down the real difference between legendary and mythical Pokemon. You better look forward to that one because it was the most requested pair of terms. If the linguistics of Pokemon has piqued your interest, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so that you don't miss the coming episodes, and leave a comment just to help boost this series in the YouTube algorithm. Before I go today, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who supports this channel financially, especially luxury patron Ethan from Chicago, Gano, Wispy, Hafa, and Tim for becoming channel members, Charon for becoming a patron, and Winged Fig and Gano again for boosting your Patreon level. Your friendship and your support means everything to me. Thank you everyone for watching, and of course thank you to Nob and Kara for making this series possible. We'll see you in the next chapter.